We'll welcome you also, and I know for Mickey and I, we were just so pleased that these very eminent scientists came and joined us today. And the next three speakers are all very much involved with applying forensic science to help improve justice. And I think that's a beautiful thing for us to learn about, whether it be finding missing persons or preventing torture in different areas. So our next speaker is Dr. Morris Tidball-Binz, and he's the Forensic Coordinator of the Assistance Division of the International Committee of the Red Cross, based in Geneva, Switzerland. He received his medical degree from the National University of La Plata in Argentina, where he was born, and he has had additional training in forensic anthropology and forensic medicine, including at Guy's Hospital in London. He has specialized in applying forensic sciences to human rights and humanitarian investigation, and he's carried out forensic casework in more than 40 countries around the world. Very interestingly, he was the first director of the Argentine forensic anthropology team that worked with the grandmothers of the Playa de Mayo, who still march once a week every day looking for their lost children and grandchildren now. And this organization has helped to try to identify the children that were taken during that period. He's been involved in the prevention of torture of the Inter-American Institute for Human Rights, and he's published extensively on issues of medical documentation of torture, monitoring prison conditions, protection of human rights defenders, forensic investigations into the missing, and the management of human remains in armed conflicts and catastrophes. We're really pleased to have him with us, Dr. Tidball-Binz.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, on behalf of the International Committee of the Red Cross, I wish to start by congratulating the Academy for choosing this year's theme on the forensic edge of global research, and by sincerely thanking the President for honoring me with the invitation to speak at this plenary session. My presentation will offer a testimonial overview of some of the benchmarks, challenges, and opportunities identified in the development of global humanitarian forensic action. So, what does this mean in practice? And how did forensic sciences acquire their present-day status as a highly regarded tool for humanitarian action? Meaning the range of activities aimed at alleviating suffering and protecting the dignity of all victims of war and catastrophes. Not only that, but by making it possible to recover and identify the dead and to resolve and prevent the missing in large-scale and challenging operational contexts, forensic sciences have contributed to the recognition that the proper management of the dead from war and catastrophes is an essential component of humanitarian response, together with the rescue and care of survivors and the provision and rehabilitation of essential services. In effect, one very large but historically overlooked group of victims of armed conflict and catastrophes are those who die and go missing as a result of those events, and their bereaved families, whose anguish and quest for information about their loved ones may last for decades, as illustrated by the case example of Spain, where tens of thousands of victims are still searching for the whereabouts and remains of their loved ones who went missing 70 years ago during the Spanish Civil War. The impact of a disappearance on the surviving relatives of a person missing in armed conflict has long been recognized as one of the worst sufferings caused by war. Dr. Marcel Junot, a delegate for the International Committee of the Red Cross during the Spanish Civil War, compared that suffering to torture. This recognition is today universal and is enshrined by substantive national and international jurisprudence. For example, in a historic sentence of the Inter-American Court for Human Rights against the state of Guatemala for the disappearance of Nicholas Chapman Blake, a US citizen abducted in that country by the security forces in 1985, and whose remains were recovered and identified only in 1992, the court considered that the suffering caused on the bereaved relatives by the lack of information on the whereabouts of Mr. Chapman amounted to torture, and it ruled that compensation be awarded to the family accordingly. The tragedy of the missing is in fact a global phenomenon affecting millions of people worldwide, whose right to know is protected under international humanitarian law and is enshrined by the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949, which have been signed and ratified by all countries in the world. However, until relatively very recently, there were no effective means available to resolve this humanitarian tragedy in any sizable way. When a small group of forensic scientists visited my country, Argentina, in early 1984 on behalf of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAFS, to offer advice on the scientific investigation into thousands of victims from the military regime which ruled the country between 1976 and 1983, no one suspected that they were in fact laying the foundations of humanitarian forensic action. In effect, the AAAFS delegation, which included distinguished Academy members, including its former president, Lowell Levine, Drs. Luke Tedeschi, Leslie Lukash, and Clyde Collins Snow, helped set in motion the first ever large-scale and systematic application of forensic sciences to the investigation of mass murder and of disappearances, primarily in order to bring answers to the bereaved and to help resolve the tragedy of the missing. The experience acquired in Argentina was later used for the same purpose in other countries in Latin America and then in the rest of the world. Forensic scientists have played the leading role throughout these developments, often with the help of key institutions and organizations. Among those, I wish to mention in particular the Argentine team of forensic anthropology, the first ever of its kind, established in 1984 thanks to the visit of the AAAFS delegation, and which pioneered and has greatly contributed to the use and development worldwide of forensic anthropology applied to these investigations, as well as to the formation of similar teams in many countries around the world, such as Guatemala and Peru, which themselves have played a significant role in the development of this field of forensic sciences. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo are non-governmental organizations of visionary relatives of the missing in Argentina, the first to have applied forensic genetics for the identification of their disappeared grandchildren, the International Commission on Missing Persons, which pioneered the use of high-throughput DNA analysis for large-scale identifications of the missings in the Balkans and elsewhere in the world, and the ICRC's own forensic unit, established in 2003 to help disseminate and implement the recommendations from that same year's International Conference on the Missing and Their Families. Lately, the growing interest of the wider forensic community in forensic action, including the world's leading academic associations, as exemplified by the Academy itself, is, I believe, one of the most thrilling and promising developments in this field. In consideration to Dr. Ubelacher's kind insistence when inviting me to speak at this plenary session that I say a few words about my personal experience in these developments, in other words, that I speak from the witness stand, I will take the opportunity to mention in passing some of the many colleagues and friends whom I have had the privilege and honor to meet and work with since meeting the AAAFS delegation visiting Argentina one morning of June 1984 in the city of La Plata, where I was studying medicine. That was a time when those involved in human rights activism were overwhelmed with the challenges of bringing redress to tens of thousands of victims in my country. I was immediately mesmerized by this group of gringos, some of whom I knew from reference only as world-leading forensic scientists who were humbly offering to help in recovering and identifying the puzzle of thousands of missing people from a ruthless dictatorship. One of them in particular, Dr. Clyde Collins Snow, is to blame for having derailed me from the last years of a promising and comfortable medical career and into the wild and underpaid world of forensic anthropology. Remember, that was well before the glamorous days of the CSI effect. My family was not impressed. At least not until some years later, when the voluntary work that we were carrying out in Argentina, thanks largely to the training from Clive Collins Snow and his colleagues, was featured in Time magazine and other media, hailing the work carried out by the group of crazy Argentinians who formed the Argentine team of forensic anthropology. And I also did finish my medical career, albeit too late to disengage myself from the forensic lure.